Welcome to What Dogs Have Taught Me. I'm your host, Julie Hart, and today I'm honored to have my friend, colleague, and mentor, Nelson Hodges, as my guest. I met Nelson about 9 or 10 years ago when he was speaking at a dog training conference, and what he had to say just really resonated with me. And so after that, I checked into any classes he offered and started taking classes with him. And what I found was that he had a very unique perspective on dogs and how to help them. He's worked with animal behavior and rehabilitation for more than 40 years. Nelson has specialized in canine behavior, helping others to understand the nature, intelligence, language, and motivations of all canines. In 2016, Nelson created the Canine Human Relationship Institute located in Blue Ridge, Texas, to act as a university-level education center for professional dog trainers. That's Nelson's official description on his website. But what I can say is that Nelson's knowledge and input has really helped me relate to dogs better and also to help explain dogs to their human companions. I've had the privilege of working with Nelson for 4 years when he came out to New Mexico and taught the Fearful Feral Dog Workshop here. And I've gotten to watch him work with dogs quite a bit through that. And Nelson manages to start earning trust with even these severe dogs within a very short amount of time. That even piqued my curiosity more, and I've wanted to learn more about how he does that and his thought process. What I found too is that Nelson doesn't actually give a lot of direct answers. He tries to communicate concepts to people so then we can apply those concepts to different situations. I also find you can't quite put the CHRI training methodology into a box of balanced or positive only. It's kind of its own thing that honors what dogs are and communicates with dogs in ways the dog understands. And I don't think many people could disagree with that. This is a 2-part podcast because Nelson and I managed to just talk for a long time. And the first part is about how he got started in dog training and some of what the Canine Human Relationship Institute is about, plus some other insights into human and dog behavior. If anyone is interested in pursuing the Canine Human Relationship Institute, which I would encourage, please go to chrinstitute.com and look up the courses. Nelson has several courses that are sequential in the relationship-based behavior modification segment, but he also has specialized courses such as the Fearful Feral Dog course, or he just hosted an aggressive dog online course, which will be available for purchase. I also am teaching the Fearful Feral Dog workshop next year as a guest instructor for CHRI, which I'm honored to do. As always, if anyone is interested in more information about me and what I offer, please go to my website, hearttoheartcanine.com, HART2HEARTCANINE.com. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the show. Yeah, was it 9 years ago you did that talk at ICP?
I don't know.
It was after dinner and it was like an hour. I think it was, but
Beats me.
So that's where I first learned about you.
Okay.
And I think it was about fearful dogs. And at the time I was fostering fearful dogs, and I thought, like this guy's kind of saying some things that I realized, and you said a lot of other things, and I thought it was really interesting. So it made a lot of sense to me, right? And so that's why I started taking RBBM, and in Philadelphia, RBBM is like just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like It's a short little intro, as I've learned, now, of course. I do remember a lot of emotions coming from the students. So people say
Yes.
Nelson makes people cry. It's true.
In many ways.
Not really. But I think it was just because people realized things they hadn't realized and,
Yeah.
felt a little maybe guilty or I don't know, sad that they hadn't realized those things. But in the long run, that was a good thing because if you don't realize it, you can't change it.
Exactly.
And then I went to course 2, and of course, Chicory was my dog, and he was amazing. But that's really where things started to click for me. So I would say if there are people out there thinking about going to course 2 with CHRI, I just kept taking courses. So then we got into doing the Fearful Feral Dog thing together because like 2 of the people brave enough and crazy enough to go, yeah, there's 20 feral dogs. Let's just have a bunch of people out and start training them in front.
Yeah. If you really want to know how people work with dogs, yeah. Yeah. Let's see them work with feral animals.
Yes. Since I've seen you do that, you really can help dogs.
Well, nice to know I've got somebody that understands.
Yeah, it was great. But I don't know if I know how you got started training dogs. So I thought, and I don't know if I've ever heard you talk about it. So I thought I'd ask.
Well, some things I keep nebulous and secret, if you know how well, actually, initially, I guess I was probably, first of all, I was born into a household with a trained Belgian police dog. It was a Dutch Shepherd. That was Dusty. And Dusty, since I was born in South America, Dusty was there to protect the family, but he was also an incredibly smart, affectionate for the family dog, essentially. An incredible dog. So he was the model, frankly, of me understanding what a dog like that could and should be. Moving to the States, my parents back to the States, there was a few years where didn't have a dog. Actually, I had cats. So when I was old enough to actually take care of things, I actually went on the my older brother had a newspaper route. It was huge and he wanted help at 4 a.m. And so I helped him with that and I got paid a little bit. And so that pay built up. And I'd do things around the neighborhood for other neighbors as well. And we had dogs everywhere, all over the place. Dogs on one side of us had a Weimaraner, female Weimaraner, and on the other side was trying to think back. Oh, Brittany Spaniel, yeah,
Oh,
beautiful. Others there were gosh, all sorts of dogs of different types. So I decided I wanted a German Shepherd. And it was back then, 1960, early 60s, when a kid said that is your responsibility. When you paid for it, you did everything, and it was literally your dog. That was kind of my introduction to things. And because of my, I guess, I don't know, whatever else, empathy at the time and understanding of animals, since I had cats, birds, a pet duck, which actually came to me as a rehabilitation thing. That was at the time where people started bringing me animals to do rehab or behavior modification.
so you
My
had a
first,
reputation even then.
yeah, and this was in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay.
It was at the time this idyllic city. It was called the oil capital of the world. It was called It was actually labeled as America's most beautiful city. It was just kind of this ideal place. It was a wonderful place and a wonderful time to grow up, frankly. Neighbors for miles around then would bring me animals that they needed help with. And I just related to them in a certain way. That duck was named Pato, or I named it Pato, which is duck in Spanish, male duck in Spanish. So that was his name. They brought him to me in the trunk of a car with a milk crate over him because he would bite people and he just can't say he'd been physically abused. He was completely misunderstood, and so I saw that, and I picked up the milk crate and I picked him up and walked him in the backyard, and it was like nobody's ever done that before. I just picked him up and walked in the backyard. I said, okay, I'll work with him. And they said, well, you can have him. I said, okay. So, and I had no fences around. We had fences three sides, but not on the outward sides of the house. So there was no gate or anything like that. So it was just the backyard. And so I put him down in the backyard, and I sat with my back up against a tree, and over on the side, I decided to just kind of dig a little pond under a little hole under the faucet and drip some water out so he could get water and feel safer and all that stuff. And I sat right next to him there, and he spent about 3 hours just going around me like this, just looking at me and kind of going, a very soft, quack, 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 type thing. Eventually, he came over and he sat down, lay down beside me. So then I actually took him indoors and laid on the couch and had him draped over my chest. There's photos of him with me like that.
How old were you at this point?
11.
11. So your parents were okay with the duck in the house, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Serious.
Yeah. So, like I said, we had cats, dogs, birds, whatever else. Well, that was a typical thing that I would allow the animal time to study me and my trustworthiness and how I behaved, because I didn't behave like other humans around them and wanting to grab them or anything else. Off to college and moving to St. Louis, which was a major shock and environment in the type of city that it was. We went from the idyllic city in the world to this was 1969, Vietnam War protests with, the ROTC building being burned down at universities, horrible race problems, and pollution so bad in St. Louis, second worst in the world at that time, that you couldn't see more than a quarter of a mile. People don't understand what air pollution is these days. We have no air pollution compared to that, the way it was. So that was a culture shock extraordinaire, and living in we're in an apartment instead of a home and all that stuff. So off to do some government work in Southeast Asia, and then back to college again and working at the same time to support myself and put myself through college, because that's what you did back then. If you didn't make the money, you didn't go to college. During that time, after 4 or 5 years background in, I'll say, human psychology, psychological operations, understanding, neurobiology of the brain, and the massive things, by the way, that we've learned in the past 30 years about the brain and neurobiology is a game changer in everything, frankly. And then spending more time in university level stuff, architecture, history, et cetera. But I started working with people's dogs during that time too. And coming at it from a psychology standpoint, Now, to start with, I did the typical, obedience training thing, and that was fine for 60 to 80% of the dogs, but it wasn't working for the ones on the outer edges of things.
Mm, yeah.
And that's where my understanding of the way the brain works started bleeding into that. And I kind of can't say I abandoned, I don't think I've ever done into this.
I don't think I've heard this before, so.
Yeah, I didn't abandon obedience. Spent 3 years doing that more before I actually started changing into trying to infuse what I understood about behavior. And I'm not talking about four quadrants or behaviorism or those things, but actual, because those are simple, too simple of modules. Humans always want simple answers, and it's thousands of things. It's truly thousands of things. And so understanding how to lead an environment, a conversation, if you will, a cooperation to a better answer. And the one thing I learned in PSYOP was never lie. Unfortunately, they've gotten that message these days. Never lie, always tell the truth, but you take the perspective, you help change people's perspective about things with the truth. And so that's the overall. So the overall for me is that the behavior of the animal, of the human in relationship to the animal, the environment you put that animal into. And that's where that all started. And training is part of it. So it's the reverse of what I've seen a lot of the past 50 years
Mm.
in the importance of one versus the other. Okay. They're both important, and neither should be negated or misunderstood, frankly. So,
So it
thanks for
all
that question.
started with an aggressive duck. First of all, I have many questions about this duck, but why were people seeking rehab for an aggressive duck back in the 60s? Okay, that's unusual. And then they found you, and you were 11. And then as an 11-year-old, you sat in the yard with a duck for hours.
Yes, 5 hours actually.
Unusual for a
Yeah,
11.
I'm kind of weird. I understand. I am not your normal person. That's okay.
Yeah, not everyone can be normal. It's all right. We'll forgive.
Just remember, half the people are below normal. It's the law of averages.
So then, well, one of the things I have down here is how did that progress into the more primitive dogs on the ends of the spectrum? So it sounds like you were doing obedience training and you realized there was a need for more.
Well, the outer edges, it's not a linear thing. There's so many different behaviors that are out of, a norm. I'd rather not do it as a linear thing. It's more of this amorphous blob, and where things seep out of normality, just like humans or any other animal. There are behaviors and the way particular brains structure themselves, because every living thing is different. Every living thing is different. There have never been and never will be two exact same brains, same neurons, et cetera, et cetera. That's the point of it. So it's more of a seeking fitting aspects to the behavior of that person or animal and then helping to change perspective, knowing there are thousands of possibilities to get there by working with those animals and humans, uh, learning to find which is the most effective. It takes years, obviously. It takes years to start to get that feel for, okay, here's the category, but what's the specific about this? If you rest on your haunches, you know, you could say, oh, I've got it. And this is where I try to be cautionary with people who've done something for 15 or 20 or 25 years and they think they've got it. Trust me, that last 5% changes everything that you learn after that, if you don't think you have it. Because if you do, then you stop, you rest. And comfort is not a good thing in life, because then you just deteriorate. Stress is good.
Right. It's a little bit off topic, but I was listening, on my drive, I was listening to a bunch of podcasts and stuff. And there's a book out called Uncertain, I think now. But the lady who wrote it goes into the importance of not having everything, certain, and the benefits of being unsure and maybe not knowing exactly what will happen.
Yeah.
I need to buy it because it sounds really interesting.
It does.
If you think about it now, like so many things are certain, even, like when I used to travel before I had kids, we lived in Germany. And the only way you really knew what that place was like was to go there. You might be able to see a photo and read a short description, or a restaurant. You could read about it in the travel book, right? But now you can, see what the food looks like. You can see everyone's reviews. You can see all these things. And it, like, our life is very much more certain. And I wonder if that's kind of made people more risk averse.
That's a very good analysis. I would say what I've seen over the past 50 years or so is the drive and desire for comfort. Comfort actually is a slow death. It really is.
It is.
Because if you
Yes.
try to avoid newness, new knowledge, new experiences, stress in certain situations, then your brain just kind of goes into auto and you end up dying. I've seen so many people over my life, once they sit down, when they retire and they sit down, they die in a very short amount of time, relatively. When you give up, and that's literally what you're doing. And I feel like the modern world, with all its conveniences, has been used to give us what we want, both hedonistically as well as survival, to just control everything for us, so that what we become is something, learning how to use the things that give us comfort rather than learning.
That's why I like working with dogs, because
Yes.
first of all, you never quite know what you're going to get.
And that's why so many people have a problem with working with dogs around the edges. Yeah, you definitely have to get out of your comfort zone.
Physically, emotionally, ego-wise.
And there you go. Yeah. You have to present, I talk about this in just about every class. You have to present yourself honestly to that animal. If you try to lie to it, if you try to control it, if you try to do anything else, you're really putting up a block between you and that animal. And that's why I don't think many people understand how to work with fearful feral dogs, because you can't reach them by giving them a lie. Dog is going to tell you exactly what it feels about you.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing with aggressive dogs.
Yes. And those huskies, of course, too.
Yeah, yeah, they have interesting ancient genetics. So yeah, there's no BS on.
Yeah, it is kind of funny how after I did that course, husky mixes seem to have come into my
You're welcome.
life. I think some of the questions I have later will get back to this uncertainty. Yeah, I hope I've passed that on to my kids. You know, like,
Yeah,
and I think I have, like, my kids will do things and they like some adventure and they like to explore and travel and things. So I hope it's gotten out there a little bit because I do think it makes people stretching that comfort zone makes you more it gives you more confidence to try something else, I think. It's
yes,
just like the dogs, if you don't die, if you
yeah.
live through it, you're more
That's how you learn. If you don't die, you've learned from the experience, and then you go, okay, how could I have done this better the next time this happens? And again, probably I was maybe 5 years old when my mother gave me the best advice ever. Just jump out there and get all skinned up. And that's what she meant for everything, everything. So I did. I tried everything, and I still do everything. That's what people don't understand. That everybody always asks me once they start learning about the different things that I still do, how do you do all those things? My question back is, well, how do you not?
Yeah, so just for everyone may not be familiar, you are an architect,
All this stuff. Yeah, I'm an architect. Yes, a licensed
musician.
architect. I had my own architecture firm for 43 years. I closed it in 2019 because I wanted to live longer without this.
Musician, race car driver and instructor,
You know,
um, dog. I almost
whatever.
trainer doesn't seem like the right word. Aficionado.
Fine. Martial
Art,
artists.
that's right. That's right. I knew I was forgetting one. That was it.
There's okay,
So,
good. That's all. There's no more. There's plenty more. I just don't say about it.
um, so, so after college, I assume you met your wife. You guys have been married
Actually, we met while I was in college.
in college.
Yeah, she
And
was
then,
out, but I spent more years in.
and
Yeah.
then you guys just like dogs. And I mean, you had a large pack at one time. It's a little
Yes.
smaller with quotes because it's still what you still have four?
Got four permanent, working with a German Shepherd pup right now to we're working on initial aspects of creating a service dog. She's a very smart, sweet, excellent dog. So she will become a great service dog. Yeah, so I've got five currently in the house, four of them permanent, and as permanent as possible, with my 21 and a half year old Siberian Husky girl. Oldest, she is officially and recognized as the oldest Siberian Husky on earth right now.
Yeah,
So
sweet girl.
she wasn't at one time. She was a hellion. She's a Husky. She is. She's a great dog.
What has watching all these dogs over the years as a pack, how has that helped you understand dogs? And I realize this could be a 3-day conversation, but
Yeah.
um, because I don't have nearly that many, but I have had like a rotating group of 3 or 4 for 15 years. And then the first person I studied under had 9 to 12 dogs. So I feel very lucky to have learned some lessons by actually not having to have them all in my house.
There you go. I, I mean, we averaged over the years, we averaged 8 personal dogs. And then I'd have a bunch of behavior cases in. And the only behavior cases mostly that I would take on were severe case behaviors, and the ones that, initially I would take in dogs that needed additional help, and then it became to the point where if I could not educate the humans fast enough to not have terrible situations happen to the dog or to them, then I would make a decision with their agreement to take those dogs into my pack, my home, and work with them to bring their level down to where I could educate the humans a little bit, because they're not going to become trainers or whatever else to meet in the middle. I had to bring that dog to this point, which sometimes took 8 days and sometimes it took 8 months. And that was a business decision I made. It was also a decision that when you have a pack of, 8 to 12 dogs and you bring in others, I needed that number and I needed the right dogs. And that's what I learned from putting various behaviors, various animals together to figure out early on and quickly what balanced, I'll say, weight of numbers of dogs and their behaviors, their personalities. How do I make this pack that influences those severe case behavior dogs to look at them and go, okay, this makes sense to me. And they're looking to this, idiot monkey up here for direction. He must be pretty powerful and he must be in charge. So that weight, that number of well-behaved dogs, and I don't mean on place type things, I'm talking about the influence that they had 100% of the time, of the cooperation they had, the pro-sociality of it all with themselves, with me, and influencing those dogs coming in. Otherwise, it would have been a bloodbath, literally. I rarely had severe issues. Yeah, we had some squabbles and things, but I would break it up quickly, and there was no anger, no nothing, no dogs injured, et cetera, et cetera. I got bit a few times because of stepping in between dogs, never personally attacked. Few misunderstandings that happened where I had to control a dog when they were going after each other or about to, or bad signals. And that's about the only times that I really got bit. There was one incident that dog with multiple bites on it, big guy, came in, and I think the first night I felt something in his paw. First of all, aggressive dogs that bite people, you don't grab their paws.
Right.
But he and I had an understanding, no problems, et cetera, et cetera. And I felt a tick between his paw pad and so I was so focused on just getting that out. I almost got it. My brain was so focused on that. I learned a lesson, and it goes pow, and I went, "Did you just bite me?" And yeah, there's holes in my hand, and I went, "Oh yeah, bump." So I apologized to him in the only ways that I could. Sorry, buddy. I lowered my head. He came over. I scratched his head, and we were fine. So that was my fault.
One thing I've learned is kind of what dogs accept and desire as far as energy level.
Yes. And you have to influence that too. The human always influences those. Like I teach in classes, either you influence the dog or the dog influences you. And I don't negotiate with dogs. That doesn't mean I'm hard. It means that if the road turns, guess what? I'm going to probably turn the steering wheel, but I'm going to still stay on the pavement part. So it's guiding that situation for the best outcome for all. That's what pro-sociality means, not for the individual, for all of them. And then it's any social animal, and dogs are social animals, humans are social animals. We want that involvement with other individuals. And so that's one of the reasons that we were able to connect between 35 and 45,000 years ago, humans and dogs, the oldest co-species element with humans that we've had, period, was because we're both social animals and want interaction. We genetically need that to be part of something. That's what herds and et cetera, animals, whether they're prey or predators, having that and understanding how does this particular pack go together. Over time, you learn personalities and temperaments of different dogs, and you start plugging in, well, I need a dog that's kind of this that would work with this. And those are the dogs you look for or happen upon and go, okay, that's going to be my dog. And a few times I've had my mind changed by people who knew I was looking for a dog, friends of mine, and for a year or so I'd be searching, and then somebody'd call me up and, you need to look at this dog. I go, okay, what is it? Well, it's this. Well, that's not what I'm looking for. No, you need to go see this dog. So I agreed to go see it. And sure enough, they were right. It wasn't what I was looking for, but it was exactly what was needed because that was a unique 1 in 10,000 dog.
Mm.
So those happy surprises are always good too. You just have to recognize it.
I think people think when you live with a group of dogs that it's complete chaos all the time. But it's, I mean, at least my experience is they don't want chaos. They want, like, all
Correct.
mine, of course, are just sleeping in the same room with me right now, and that's
No,
pretty much.
yeah, I've got 3 German Shepherds and 2 Huskies right here.
That's kind of how they like their routine, and they like to
Yes,
do their activities, but then they like calmness. And I
just
mean,
just like humans do.
yeah, well, most humans,
Most.
and so I think by me watching that, because I had Annie and now Chardonnay is she's a little control freak, but they taught me what was appropriate, what's not appropriate. Annie very early on would tell me, oh, dogs aren't allowed to jump on her back and all these things. So I learned like what my let's say leader dogs
Right,
kind of expected. And so then I could kind of mirror that by what I expected because I
right.
figured they knew what
Yeah,
they
dogs always understand dogs better than humans, better than humans do for dogs. So,
uh,
yeah, if you're here's what I try to put forth to trainers, clients, whatever, is dogs know how to be a dog. You don't. Study your dog. And so, you asked me a question, how did you learn all this stuff? Well, it wasn't just the educational aspect. It was taking elements of understanding predator prey through combat, 55 years of martial arts, all these other elements, human psychology, studying canines, and every aspect of canines I possibly could over decades of time. All of those things that helped me understand and put together when I observed dogs doing things. It's all about living with dogs. So living with packs of dogs, honestly, is the best teacher, period. But you really, really have to get out of your human brain and stop thinking like a human. No, that's weird to say or difficult for most people because we're caught up once again in our humanity and our understanding of the universe from a human standpoint. But if you can be somewhat empathetic and understand a more primal instinctual survival brain, which we have the capability of doing, it's still there. Most people don't like going there because it's unsettling. But if you study it, if you do things to study it physically too and understand these aspects of survival, it all begins to make sense to you.
One of the things I noticed was when I bring in a new foster dog, usually that dog was afraid, most likely. Puppies that didn't have mom around long enough or things like that. Not like serious, serious fear issues eventually, but still things that needed to be tweaked. So I integrated all those dogs in and learned, how to house train them, leash train them, all that stuff, doing that. But what I found, and I just thought of it this way, actually, my dogs kind of ostracized the new dog for a couple days at least.
Yeah.
It depends on their personality, how much they'll kind of dominate that dog or just kind of avoid it, like go up and sniff and be like, yeah, whatever, you can stay here, but I don't like you. But it's probably for survival because that dog that I bring in isn't balanced.
Well, it's not pro-social for the way the pack has already determined this is the best way we live together. And that's true for any new individual coming into any group. That's where that weight, that balance of dogs have already figured it out with the human. And that's where I step in a lot more than I see other humans because of my background of understanding what's actually going on with them in more visceral levels, I guess, and being able to affect them with the correct outcome by me stepping in rather than observing how they handle things. All my dogs have always known he's going to handle it. I don't have to. And he handles, and if dogs feel that way, they're not going to take the opportunity afterwards to teach that dog something because I already affected them correctly. So that's kind of the gauge that I've gone by over the years of, am I doing it correctly, or do my dogs feel like they need to step in when I'm not around, being, the big bear monkey guy. If it's calm, composed, etc., when I'm not present right there at that moment, and they don't have to act upon things, then I'm being effective. It isn't about control, it's about influencing. It's about saying, that's not what we do here. This is what we do instead. And it's not a matter of just stopping behavior. It's a matter of giving the right behavior to them and saying, no, this is what we do here instead, and see how everybody gets along. And the survival aspect of the brain wants to see patterning. Okay, you want to see 1, 2, 3. Now I've got the pattern, the pathway. And that's what I teach in all these classes, is understanding. The first time is a surprise. Dog comes in first day, it's a surprise. Everything's a surprise. And of course, they're going to be tense, fearful, uncertain, etc., or want to be dominant and control, or all of those things that different personality dogs do. So the first time's a surprise. The second time is I've got A/B comparison. So I come in on a Friday to this new group that I have no idea who it is. Okay, Saturday, I see a few of the same routines. Okay, I can calm a little bit. Now I can test. And then all of a sudden the big monkey comes in and says, no, that's not what we're doing. And I go, oh, okay. And I observe all the other dogs and go, they're not doing that either. Okay. And then the third day you go, I see how this is going. So that 72-hour period, which is also a biological, neurological period in life, not just humans, but in dogs too, that 3 day pattern. Now you're observing patterns, but there's also things that go on biologically for 72 hours. There's a lot of changes that go on. And so those first 3 days, I always told my clients, not terrified dogs or not super aggressive dogs, that 72-hour period, you're going to see the testing, how does this go? Where do I fit in? All of that stuff. And it depends on the level or severity of, wherever the edge of that dog is in, how long that takes. the better the human is at understanding, the better behavior that you have towards that end goal of assisting, communicating, et cetera, the shorter a time it is. So my saying that I came up with years ago was, if you want to know how you're doing, look at your dogs. Because if it takes them 3 weeks to get to a point where they're settled, you haven't been very good at doing things. Once again, except for those dogs on the edge, which, like especially fearful feral animals, they have zero reason to trust humans. So it takes a while.
Yeah, I find even, well, usually when I bring those dogs to my house, they already know me because I've trained them to walk on a leash at the shelter. But
Yeah.
even after that 3 or 4 days, they know the routine. They're coming out of their crate. They understand, like what's going to happen and where we're going and
Yeah.
all of that. The dog I just trapped, I mean, she's amazing. This dog is super smart. I've had to tell her like, don't do that once. And she's like, got it. I don't really credit that to me. She's fantastic.
Well, smarter ones survive.
Well, and this dog's definitely been in a home before, so she's very interesting because we had
Yeah.
heard from the neighbors that the man that lived in the trailer she was living under died 2 years ago.
Wow.
And some people thought that she was his dog. And we're like, well, I don't know. Like, that's kind of like far-fetched, right? Like that she lived there for 2 years after he died, and family doesn't want anything to do with the property or all kinds of things. But the whole neighborhood has bowls out for water and things for
Yeah.
her. The neighbor next door said for a while the pipes were leaking under the trailer, so they had water. She had at least 2 litters. But once we got her, and there were toys all over the yard, which I found interesting. And then once we got her, I'm like, oh, this dog's been a pet because it just all came back to her so fast. And she plays fetch like no one's business. I have to wonder if they're like, wow, survival at this lady's house is a lot better. It's not so hard.
Dogs don't feel sorry for themselves. They accept their environment, and it really goes back to, if you take away our prefrontal cortex and outer layers of the cerebral cortex and other areas of the brain, we get back to uh, a more primal, ancient, instinctual type of understanding of survival, and they they have developed to not need those things because they had other tools, their morphology of their body, to be able to survive better as predators. They still have massive brains comparatively. I mean, you're talking about 8.4 billion neurons and all the possible permutations of thought and memory and understanding and complexities, all of that stuff. So highly intelligent animals, their brain focuses are about how, first of all, how the brain is structured, which isn't like ours. Certainly they have parts that are identical to ours as far as pieces of the brain, but the layering and structure of importance of various elements, our senses, for instance, is very different. And that's where all the gaps of understanding are created. One of those is we're eye hand dominant. So we see things and we manipulate those with our hands. They are nose, mouth dominant. They smell it and they use their mouth to manipulate things. And when your brain is focused on the scent, their eyes are used for different things, not for what we do. It's an entirely different brain structure as far as how they rely on seeing the world, the environment, the universe itself. And that's what's developed over, the past 98 million years to become a dog or a wolf. And actually, the classification was changed. We changed the classification of dogs from Canis familiaris to Canis lupus. familiaris because the genetic projects that, Dr. Elstrander and others did back about 10, 12, 13 years ago, identifying all the genetics that they could within the dogs. We found they were so close to modern wolves, much closer than we thought percentage-wise. So that's been renamed the wolf, basically. So it's a domestic wolf.
That's very interesting, I think, when you contrast it to how people are understanding, quote unquote, understanding dogs, which is actually getting further and further away from what
their reality. Yes.
Training kind of goes with that and stuff that the science found they were, is it 3% difference in DNA?
It's actually, in some cases, it's 1%. It's
So
that close.
tiny difference. But
Yes.
yeah, there's all this, oh, dogs aren't wolves. They don't work like wolves. They don't think like wolves.
They're closer than most people think. Because go back to the human history aspect of when we stopped being hunter-gatherers and we became quote unquote civilized, what we call in civilizations about 12 and a half, 13,000 years ago. And that was about the beginning of agriculture, what we call agriculture, and collecting other animals about 11,000 years ago that we have evidence of. I suspect it's older than that because every time we have evidence, we keep pushing the timelines back when we discover something new, digging around in the dirt somewhere on Earth. 11,000 years ago, we had sheep and we had, we started getting auroch, which are turned into cattle and pigs, hogs, stuff like that over the next 6,000 years. So the dog's been with us approximately 41,000 years, which was proto-dog. It's basically a sister line of wolf that became dogs. That's quite a gap there of 30,000 years we've lived with that animal as a hunter-gatherer, which is what we used them for and they used us for. We were cooperative partners in survival. Once we started bedding down in one location and needing the agricultural aspects, the animals and the grain that we grew in one location, then territory became super important for us and to protect it. So our partners in hunting became partners in protecting territory. Massive change. And that was the massive change that changed dogs forever. That's also when those other proto dogs and wolves that weren't with us became our enemy, because we no longer studied them and kept them in awe for their capabilities and their senses, and followed them to a successful hunt. Now we feared them, so we taught our children. And I did a study, gosh, I don't know, 40 years ago or more, on where did nursery rhymes come from that dealt with fear of the wolf. And you look back, even in Sumerian culture and before, the same stories, just different taglines and different aspects. But that's how long, ever since we, quote unquote, settled into one spot, we've taught our children through these nursery type rhymes or stories, the musical bards even, to fear and hate and kill the wolf. So we have mentally separated wolves from our dogs more than the genetics would let you know. But the behaviors that have been caused then have been influenced heavily by living with us for thousands and thousands of years. So the behaviors, the way the brains are structured, their morphology is still the same, but the way the brains have been structured have been to the ones that have survived with us, changed their behavior massively. There's still that wolf there.
Yeah.
And that's what people can't handle or want to work with or want to be around. What's unacceptable to humans isn't necessarily what's unacceptable to dogs.
And I think it goes back to what you mentioned about we all have that predator in us and it makes us uncomfortable. So if you see a dog acting that way,
Yeah.
it reminds us that we might have a little bit of that in us.
Yeah. And I've been that predator. I've had to be predator and prey in my life. And so I understand it, and it's controllable. That's the whole thing. And you have choices. You don't need to just respond out of fear, out of panic or anything else. If you practice it, it can be just enough and no more, which is another one of my sayings. And that's what I mean by that. If all I need to do is look at a dog to stop him from doing something, that's all that was necessary. Why do I need to get upset and be a, flailing squirrel going, ah, because then I become
That would
weak.
be funny.
Yeah, well, yeah,
One of the things I have on here is how has martial arts helped you with dogs, but
that's part of it. Being in combat itself, and I'm not talking about martial arts, I'm talking about war. It changes your understanding of life entirely. It changes your understanding in the necessity and the intensity of what morality is, much more than people who haven't been in combat. Wrestling with that as a moral human, which most people, are moral, most morality lies in two places in the brain. And it's interesting the different patterns and pathways that there are two types of understanding of morality in humans. And we found the same general areas within dogs in the cerebral cortex of where those patterns of decisions made about things that we would consider on a moral level. So it's interesting how the dogs that have survived are the ones that will live with us, cooperate with us as humans. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lived, and those didn't. This whole aspect of, especially on dogs that humans consider aggressive, don't want to live with those dogs. So all of those get put down. There was a place for dogs like that in the past, but not now, because we want every dog to be our fluffy bunny sitting on our lap. And that's not reality. That's actually being anti-dog.
the flip side of that is that I was at the vet with my foster dog, and this nice lady comes in with a couple little kids, with a puppy that looked Great Pyrenees to me and something else. And so I'm like, well, what is your dog? So Great Pyrenees, Anatolian Shepherd.
That's a typical mix for country people around in Texas here.
So this was in, New Mexico, not too far.
Right.
And she had, as I listened to her talk to everyone, she has goats or something. So they got the dog and
Yep.
but what's missing is that understanding of the dog. Because the dog was great with all the kids coming in, but the other dogs coming in, and it was still a puppy. And she's like, "Oh, he just wants to say hi." I'm like, "No, I don't think so. No." And so I didn't say anything. I'm not there. Like, I'm not being asked my opinion. People are living out in the country and having farms, but I think maybe some of the survival instinct or recognizing different territorial protective drives or something isn't there anymore.
Well, we humans want everything to be the way we want. And that's not realistic. It's detrimental especially to our co-species animal. It really is, it's detrimental to the animal welfare, I'll say, and the understanding to want it to be something that it's not. And if you understand and respect that animal for what it is, you have a lot better life with that animal. And that animal is going to also be much better with you because you understand how it sees the world, how it sees different situations. And that's what I try to teach, both short term and long term in each class. And then long term is how that animal sees the universe. It's just as valid as the way humans want it, especially in modern society. Modern society, well, if I get a dog, it's supposed to be this. Really? It's not a product. It's a living sentient being that makes its own decisions. What are those decisions? Well, if you don't understand what motivates a canine predator, then you're going to learn. you know
Yeah.
and everybody, what I've learned over the years working with humans, in 54, 55 countries, is that everybody thinks they're right. No matter what they think, everybody thinks they're right.
Well, that is probably true.
It is, trust me. Yeah. And then when I talk to them after something happens that I warned them about and tried to talk to them about, they all say, we just didn't think it would happen here. Every time.
They didn't think it would happen to them.
Yeah.
Just
To
so,
them, in their country, to their country, whatever.
well, as dog trainers, we all get the application or the phone call, and we predict the future, right? By what
Mhm.
we know of the
Absolutely.
breed and the behaviors, and
Yeah.
kind of know what's coming. And then usually those people don't, because we don't tell them what they want to hear. Sometimes they don't hire us, and then a year or
But
two later, they're like, "How did you know?" Like, well,
if you're having a conversation with a potential client, um, what are the things that you ask of them? What's the breed of the dog? How old? Those give you immediate information about behaviors and what levels. Okay. How long have you had the dog? So those three pieces of information give you massive amounts of understanding of what's going on. And you already know much more than the client does about that, just from those aspects. What's the medical aspect? What are all, you go through a list, of fairly short list, and then you already have the picture of actually what's going on.
yeah,
So,
usually I ask how the dog does at the vet, because that's a good
yeah.
indicator of things. And so one thing I wanted to ask you to talk about was the Canine Human Relationship Institute,
Oh, okay.
because I'm involved in that quite a bit, because I take a lot of classes and I'm certified relationship-based trainer, and kind of
Which I'm honored.
explain what made you create it, what's the overall goal, I guess, the mission.
Okay. Well, the mission, I'd had for years, I'd had a concept of, first of all, I found fairly early on that teaching humans was something that, one, I enjoyed, and two, um, I seemed to be able to reach people in different ways, and partly because of my background and understanding human behavior, the brain, how it works, ideas, actually telling the truth, and whether people wanted to hear it or not, and all of that stuff over the years in numerous subjects, all the ones you mentioned, plus a lot of other things that I do. And so I've been teaching for probably close to 40 years or so in those subjects. So I always had the idea, and I found one of my best uses was actually to teach, but it wasn't about avoiding doing. I still do. I still work with dogs, and I'd been doing what's called workshop or a seminar, which was actually course one, and kind of developing it as the concepts behind it. It went from a 2-day to a 3-day because I recognized at the end of the second day, people were just barely getting the idea. So I had to lengthen it to a third day. And some of the exercises that we do within that have changed over the years. We ran out of space and time for some of the ones that took longer and individual with their dog by themselves in a specific space and then rotating in and out. We just ran out of time. So I've had to come up with different exercises that got across the same ideas, the same concepts to people, that their dog is a lot smarter than they think. And the dog makes good decisions when you allow it to, and you don't influence that dog to have to make bad decisions. And that's, I think, one of the biggest game changers for people is they don't know their dog. They're not used to a university type of curriculum. They're used to going to these workshops and collecting. I call those collectors. I went to this. Oh, I went to this one. So you've got a bit and a piece, barely starting of anything instead of studying something. And I'm not denigrating that. It's great to go to a wide range of things and see what resonates with you. If it doesn't resonate with you, you're not going to use it anyway. For years, I'd hear, okay, you got to go teach this at my place. And okay, I'll do that. And I never went. I am not a self promoter. Period. I come from older background times when you sought out knowledge and you find those people, etc., and then you make the effort, and then you probably would be a good student. And that's the way I still take it. The easiest thing on earth to do is to say, I'm great. The hardest thing to do is to have someone else tell someone else how great that was. That's the hardest thing. And that's what I strive for, is to have enough out there in other people to say, yeah, this is worth it. Otherwise, it's just me blathering on. When they'd end the course, I'd get calls or, emails or whatever else before social media, obviously. Well, we'd like to know more. And I go, well, yeah, okay, sure. I really didn't think anybody really did, because they didn't know where it would take them, how far astray from what they thought. I kind of sloughed that off for years, thinking, well, maybe I'll start something, a school, or I didn't want to do a dog training school ever. There's plenty of places out there. There's some, good basic stuff. If you want to learn to be a dog trainer, you go work for somebody for years, or you go to these specific ones, and then you work for somebody first instead of hanging your shingle out, because you really don't know anything yet. Takes a couple of years for people to recognize, after they're in business for themselves, that they don't know. They encounter enough to go, yeah, maybe I need to get more understanding. It's not as easy as people think. At one point, I used to do, I don't know, 7 or 8 course ones per year, somewhere around North America, Canada and the US, and once in a while over in Europe. But a couple of people called me up, 2 different seminars, 2 different people didn't know each other, same night, and put it to me differently. The one comment was, look, we want to know more about this before you die. I went, well, not planning on going anywhere soon, but okay, I get it. So they both of the trainers put it to me in a different way, and I went, okay. I'd already thought about a 9 or 10-day course to try to get across applications, because really course 1, that 3-day, is just a concept thing. It's just changing your perspective on things. That's all it is. But there's tons of information there. I used to ask people, matter of fact, I did it in Canada at Karen Law's place for years, 7, 8 years in a row, I think. And, I'd see the same people 5 years in a row. Why are you here? So, well, we can only get about 20% of it at a time, and every time it's different too. So Okay, I understand. That's how much is packed in there and the concepts behind it. But that 9 or 10 day late at night, I posted on the RBBM site, which is anybody who's taken relationship-based behavior modification, which is the first course, that concept course. I said, would be anybody be interested in, a 9 or 10 day course, here? And I thought, I might get 5 or 6 people in a few months and put a class together. And by the time I looked at it, which was 20 hours later the next day, there were 24 people already saying, yeah, absolutely. And I went, oh, okay, I get it finally. And because I hadn't mentioned cost or timing or anything else. So I settled after I did all my outline and what I wanted to do. I settled on a 9 day because that would be a Saturday through the following Sunday after a week. And that gives people business wise, they know they have to take that week off rather than drag it into an additional week, bleeding it out somewhere. And I thought I could get across what I needed to within that 9 day period. Conducted first one of those and a couple of others, for a couple of years, and then recognized that the next step of what was needed, because I didn't know what people didn't know until I worked with them and taught them enough to see what was missing. And so that's kind of where all the rest of the courses have come from. There was no grand plan to do certified trainers or any of that other stuff. And frankly, the recognition, and that's what it is, a certified, relationship-based trainer. A lot of people call themselves relationship-based trainers when they don't know what that is. What they see is the relationship of the dog to them. And it's the opposite. It's the relationship of you to the dog, because the dog can only be a dog. You have capabilities, supposedly. Humans have a larger brain and more capability in our brain to think outside of the box, so to speak. And that's a lot of the focus of understanding, a lot of the more advanced classes, 3, 4, 5, and even Indy 6, and then all the others are about how that animal, how its brain works, what's similar, what's identical, and what's different than humans. It's been a progression of where do we go to, and by the first course 5, those people, they got it. But it's kind of like getting your first degree black belt after 8 or 10 or 15 years of work in a legitimate hard martial art. And I don't mean that to denigrate others. The old style, old school stuff, you're going to work for many, many years consistently. You don't get a black belt in 2 or 3 or 5 years. You get it average maybe 10 years, 10, 12 years in those. And that's the martial art I'm in too. So you get your black belt, which is certification, but that means you're finally a serious student. Doesn't mean you know it. Means you've got enough to start understanding and start testing with those dogs out there and actually learn it from the dogs then. That's what the certification means.
I have a little extra bonus of recording about aggressive dogs. Before we officially started the podcast, Nelson and I were talking about the upcoming aggressive dog course he was teaching, and this is some of what he had to say about that.
Yeah, any dog can present aggression in some fashion, some form or fashion, quote unquote. That's kind of where reactivity is different than aggression, because aggression, they don't have to be reactive. They simply make a decision. Reactive is controlling and fear-based. It's basically, do you overreact to stimuli that is normally not that way? That shouldn't be your response. That's a reactive dog. So there was a bunch of dogs that medically, man, I mean, once we found the stuff, that became my first thing when I was talking to people is take this dog and have all sorts of tests, muzzle it up. If you don't know how to do that, there's videos from different people on how to muzzle train a dog. Do it, get it done before I ever come over, because, there's no use in me coming over if there's a brain tumor, or, you've got, impacted teeth that are killing the dog, or, all that stuff. So we found a bunch of different things that way. And a lot of the dogs ended up going, after they either found out, a terminal thing or whatever else, then it was obvious what it was. And the dogs that didn't have terminal illnesses, but a lot of excruciating pain, or, you know, glaucoma or whatever else causing issues, losing senses, becoming weakened, then once they addressed those, the dogs were fine.
That concludes part 1 of the podcast with Nelson Hodges, Pato the Duck, and Nursery Rhymes. I hope you all enjoyed it and gained some valuable insight into the canine-human relationship methodology and course offerings. Please tune in next time, where Nelson and I will continue talking more in depth about canine and human behavior. And we'll get to hear about what dogs have taught Nelson.